It's week 22 of 2022. This is Talkin Science, catching you up on the month's biggest stories with Dr. Brad Tucker. Boeing lands safely, completing the final delayed testing of Starliner. Solar power generated in space is gaining momentum to light the way forward on Earth. And Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus and Mercury all line up for a delightful display for early risers and late sleepers.
This is Trekzone's Talkin Science.
Your monthly reminder that Trekzone membership is available via the join button under each video on YouTube or via the trek.zone/support. Plus, Trekzone's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and your favourite podcast feed. Find us, like, follow, and subscribe. Brad too on social media at btucker22 on Twitter. Dr. Brad Tucker on Facebook. Brad, just quickly before we get started, in news developing overnight from our record time, Artemis 1 has returned to the launch pad for those crucial wet dress tests. The missions to the moon are looking like they're on track, hopefully.
So this is kind of a redo of what they had tried to do last month. I think it's currently scheduled for the 16th that they're planning on doing. When they did it last month, they had some problems in the filling up, essentially. Hopefully that is solved, and then Artemis 1 can do this test, so then Artemis 1 can actually launch, which I think as of now, the earliest is August. So, crunch time happening for them.
Absolutely. Looking forward to lunar missions in Talkin Science's lifetime. Well, let's get on with the show. Over at Gilmour Space, our friends completed a full duration test fire last month of the new Phoenix rocket engine. This looks great, Brad.
Yeah, look, and this is kind of their static test, i.e. where they put it on the ground and then they fire it. Obviously making sure it all works. This is a big step in terms of how they're manufacturing, bits of this. And I think they're aiming for most of the bits to be 3D printed, in fact, and then manufacturing as far as the third stage. So a big step for them, obviously, because they really are aiming to have a launch, I think, next year, and they're still on track for that. So it's great to see that it is progressing for them.
Absolutely. Well, Southern Launch has picked up another grant from the federal government's Moon to Mars initiative from one friend of Trekzone to another. This one's going to help them build a mobile launch rail that'll not only be useful at the new Whalers Way facility, but it can be shipped up to the Caniba test range as well. Multifunctional use.
Yeah, this is a good step for them to now easily access between their two test ranges. So obviously, in terms of the development and practical aspects of it, really sensible, very good infrastructure. So hopefully, they can have that flexibility in launch sites and partners, and ease of infrastructure down the road, which is the name of the game here.
Well, Starliner has completed its trial flight after several months of delays, landing safely back on Earth last week, Brad.
Yeah, as you said, this was the third version of the orbital flight test. The first two times encountered various problems. The first time they did launch, but a software problem meant that they didn't reach the right orbit. The second time they had problems with their valves and their cooling system essentially on board. So they really wanted it to work. Obviously, they launched it, as you said, successfully docked and then returned to the Earth. So a big step, albeit over a year and a half delayed, that they wanted to get right and get it hopefully all checked out by NASA, so they can then start the next stage, which is a human test flight, followed by hopefully full operation.
And looking forward to that. It was a 7-day test flight that saw Boeing achieve all 11 of the mission parameters, or at least to tick the boxes. I can only imagine how little sleep the teams got during that week, though, Brad, as you were talking about there, the third attempt at getting this launch up and running.
Yeah, look, you obviously didn't want a new problem to arise. You didn't want an old problem to resurface. So there's a lot of different aspects there. So it is good that, again, it did work. It wasn't without problems, though. In fact, two of the engines didn't properly fire on the way up in the docking stage. It wasn't critical, but again, you want everything to go perfectly to plan. NASA and Boeing haven't essentially said that everything is, done and they're moving on to the next stage yet, even though, as you said, it did tick the 11 major areas. As long as NASA's happy with that, even though there's a few minor things, they can resume human test flight with it next time. And, and the key here is SpaceX and Boeing were similar in terms of timeframes. They just aren't now. SpaceX is already on Crew 4. NASA has announced a further 5 missions with SpaceX beyond the further 3 they've already had. So, if Boeing really wants to be in it, they have to be hitting everything first time in the next few goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rosie was the only passenger, a lifelike test dummy fitted with 15 sensors, collecting that all important data for how humans will fare on a ride to orbit. Fingers crossed, Brad, all is in the green, not only there, but with those 11 mission parameters as well. Obviously, lots of data collected to analyze and have final certification. As you say, they're going to be about 9 flights behind Starlink. Starlink. No, not Starlink.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the internet constellation.
Crew Dragon, yes.
Crew Dragon, that's it.
Very little margin for error. But you want them to be successful. And obviously NASA wants them to be successful. So they have multiple options, multiple missions, multiple rides, and longevity into the future. So remains to be seen, but hopefully we do see a human test flight from Boeing later this year, which is their plan, so that next year it's in full operation.
And if and when it does pass muster, it'll enter service as only the second human transportation system to ferry astronauts into orbit. SpaceX got there first, but it's not to say that Boeing can't catch up and be just as valuable.
Yeah, look, once it's operating, once it's going, no one's going to really care, to be honest, about this. It's just getting to that stage. But at some point, it does have to be there. Otherwise, NASA's not going to wait indefinitely for it to be an option.
Absolutely. Well, meanwhile, for NASA, they're re-examining the viability of space-based solar power in our ever-present push for clean energy and net zero emissions. How does this work, Brad?
Yeah, so this is an idea that is not new. In fact, it's been around for decades. It's just never been practical. But this is now the question. So the idea here is, well, in space, obviously you can put solar panel arrays that have 24-hour access to the sun. There's no clouds, there's no nighttime, there's no weather, there's no everything. And so you can get intense amounts of solar energy there. We've also improved in solar cells. In fact, one thing people don't realize is the solar panels on spacecraft are actually different than the ones here on Earth. The ones here on Earth are almost too good for in space. And then we've also had way better ways of transmitting energy. In particular, people are looking at lasers and microwaves as an idea. So all of these things are saying, well, the technology's there now. The costs are a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier to build. So maybe it is worth at least taking a look at. This is by no means saying this is going to happen, nor it happen at all, even if it starts soon. It's not going to start happening soon. So then the question is it all possible economically? Because that really is the key here. Is it economically efficient for this to be a system?
Yeah, an interesting takeaway on this one is that NASA's sort of saying it doesn't really matter on the cost, I guess, so long as those costs can be recouped. Certainly an interesting one for this study to look at. It's the first time in about 2 decades that the space agency has looked into space-based solar power, or SBSP. A short-term study now underway, but instead of looking for new ways, as you said, Brad, it's going to be investigating these past theories. So not necessarily reinventing the wheel here, looking at things from as far back as the 70s to see just how viable they are.
Yeah, and it's things like launch costs have plummeted, right? If you were to put this up on a shuttle, it would have been $40,000-$50,000. It's now $1,000 and getting lower. Developing solar panels is a fraction of the cost. Transmitting the energy all of these things are just a fraction of the cost now, and that is the name of the game. If it's not going to be economically viable, it's not going to happen. So it's really kind of this initial study to say, is this worth pursuing at all? And it's not because NASA thought of this first. In fact, they're actually late joining to the party. Part of the reason is because groups like the UK and Europe have started to look at this as well. So they're now starting to say, is this something we should take seriously, at least, to at least say, yes, it's possible and go to the next stage, or just say, nope, it's still not there, both of which are fine, but you need to know that answer.
Now, I'm curious as to how the power might be transferred from the orbiting power station to Earth, Brad. There's some wild theories out there that birds are going to be microwaved to infinity and all sorts of things. Obviously, the study's going to look at this as an integral part of the feasibility of putting it up there. And it's very, very achievable that it's going to be a way of achieving net zero emissions for power generation.
Transferring it via laser or microwaves, which is two of the popular ideas, you can see why people are concerned with it. We do transmit microwaves already on Earth. I think, this isn't a new thing. This is done. Microwave emission is happening. Laser emission is happening. So it's not just the safety, but it's also the efficiency. This is something that needs to be studied. And even though it's improved, calculate, because, when you're generating it here on Earth, less of that energy is used to transfer it from the generating source into electricity. On space, you're going to have to spend a lot of energy to transfer it down to Earth than to be used. So your threshold for generating enough has to clearly be higher than if it were to be here on Earth. And again, that's not a surprise, but it's also one of the benefits because you have this immense amount of light in there. But yeah, what are the other consequences? What are the other issues? What are the other interruptions? All these little details are really important to understand before this becomes a real thing. And again, this is if it is going to be a thing, great. If it's not, too bad.
Well, something great to end our monthly catch-up, Brad. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury are getting together from our vantage point in the early morning sky this June.
Yeah, look, it's a special planetary lineup. So for the past few months, we've had 4 of the planets in the morning sky, but finally Mercury has joined the party. So Mercury is never far from the sun, and we do see Mercury quite often, but you see it for short periods with respect to especially Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in this case. So now that Mercury is just above the horizon for pretty much the most of June, it's only visible for a short period, though. Again, it never strays far from the sun. So there's a very small window kind of in that 5:45 to 6 o'clock range where you can still see Mercury. It's above the horizon, but also the sun hasn't risen to wash it out. And it is a special treat to be able to see. I mean, and very clearly you see these 5 planets spread out over in a line. Granted, the line is angled, and that's because, well, our Earth is tilted. It's kind of cool to think that if our Earth wasn't tilted, it'd be a straight line. But alas, it is.
Saturn's up from 11 p.m. Jupiter and Mars get up around 3.5 hours later. Venus popping by at about 4:30 a.m. Astronomical viewing is not for the sound sleeper, Brad. As you say, Mercury there from 5:45. So you've either got to be a late sleeper or an early riser or a shift worker.
Exactly. And so it is a small window, but it is definitely worth checking out. And it genuinely doesn't happen that often. Mercury is often in our sky, so is Venus and Mars. You really have to wait for Jupiter and Saturn goes around the sun every just not quite 30 years. So you really have to wait for Saturn to be in the same part of the sun as the rest of those planets. And so it means it happens every 18-ish years. And every 18-ish years, it kind of flip-flops between being in the morning and then when Saturn comes to the other side and it's in the evening sky. So again, you could honestly say it's been over 35 years since it was seen in the morning sky, these 5 planets. So it's one of the few things that it is special to see. It is really cool. And you don't need anything. You just need your eyes to go out and see this great show putting on for us.
Plus, the moon's getting in on the action as well. She starts a new month orbiting around us, and it's looking like the 24th or the 25th will be the best evenings/mornings. Is this a Southern Hemisphere special, Brad, or can our Northern Hemisphere viewers catch this one?
This is the great thing. It's visible everywhere. And so, yeah, it's not like a meteor shower where you just have to be in the Southern Hemisphere or the Northern Hemisphere. The planets are visible to everyone. So the times will be slightly different in the Northern Hemisphere, but again, it's still in that early morning phase. So it's a really great thing to see. And as you said, on the 24th and 25th, the moon will be in the gap between Mars and Venus. So you'll kind of have this evenly spaced thing of 5 planets plus the moon also being in that line. So yeah, again, it's just a cool thing to see. It is a special treat. And so it's a great chance that if you're already up in the morning to go out and take a look.
Awesome, Brad. Well, I love the first Tuesday of every month this year because you beam in with the latest science and space news, and we also look back at the month that was. It's always a blast. We'll do it again next month. Happy June, Brad.
Yep, sounds good. Take care.